Hello again and welcome. If you've been following this series, then you'll know in the last videos, we've really been dealing with branching and conditionals and also loops, both for and while loops. This has allowed us to kind of move away from just simply how to store data and make data relational in Python and start actually working on some of the key tenets of programming in Python. We're going to continue on that trend right now with functions. Functions in Python, believe it or not, you've actually been working with them throughout this series. There are functions are essentially pieces of code that allow you to perform similar, if not the exact same tasks, multiple times with simply different attributes or arguments or values. Let me explain what I'm talking about. So let's say we have a string. So we're going to say, where is it at? We're going to say new string equals Tom is my is my friend. One of the functions we've actually already worked with in some detail is, like, let's just say that simple replace function. New string dot replace, which is a function. I know it's a function because it's got these two parentheses afterwards. We want to replace Tom with Bob because for whatever reason Tom has wronged you severely in the past, and new 2, we're going to print off new 2. Tom has just wronged you in the past, and you are now friends with Bob, and Tom is basically dead to you. So now we have a new string, and the new string down here is Bob is my friend. This is a function. It's a replace function, and we know that, like I said, because of the parentheses. And within these parentheses are two sets of arguments. There's argument 1 and there's argument 2. If I were to simply do this with just Tom, I'm going to get an error, as I'm going to see down here. And it's specifically a type error. And the reason why I have this type error, let's look at this, is because replace takes 2 arguments and only 1 was given. In other words, this is a function that requires 2 arguments. And arguments are going to be the things that tell the function what to actually do. You can't see this because the replace function is built into Python, but within the replace function is a series of code with variables a and b. And Tom is going to be variable a, and Bob is going to be variable b. And in that code, this function, anytime it sees a or b, it's going to replace that in the code with Tom or Bob. This is something that happens in the backend in Python, and you can't see this because you can't see the actual function because it's built into Python. You can go through the Python source code, the files, and actually find it. If you want to, feel free to do that. But what we're going to do in this video is we're going to start making our own functions. And you might be asking yourself, why should I even bother with making my own functions? Don't be like me. When I first came to Python, I'll admit that I was not a fan of functions, and this was a foolish, terrible mistake on my part. It made my code clunky, it made it slower, it was problematic. And I was just being stubborn and essentially stupid. Learn to appreciate functions very early on in your quest to learn Python for DH. And the reason why you should do this is because you will find that it makes your life infinitely easier. Functions allow you to reuse code multiple times throughout a Python script. So if there's a task that you need to do several times, I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now, but let's say you need to manipulate something, a series of strings in a very similar manner, but at different places in your code. Instead of having to rewrite the same code over and over again, copying and pasting it throughout your long script and having like a super long script, you can tighten everything up by using a function, testing that function, debugging it, and then just simply reusing it time and again by recalling a function and not copying and pasting large sections of code. That might not make sense right now. As we go through this video, though, it will become more clear. So, how do we make a function in Python? Well, in Python, to make a function, you simply use the def command, and you create a new function. So let's call this one cubed. So define cubed. And we need to have an open and a closed parentheses and a colon. And this is going to create for us a function. And you see in Atom, it has changed cubed from white to blue. That's how we know that this has worked. And notice also that it has indented. So everything that's going to be within this first indent is going to be part of my function. Now I'm going to stick with the example we've been using throughout this entire video series, and we're going to simply cube something. We're going to say that x is equal to, and we're going to say for right now, we're not going to have any arguments. We're going to simply do this. We're going to simply say 2 times 2. And we're going to return x. I'm going to explain this return in just a little bit. So I'm going to call the function, and the way I call the function is I simply do this. Let's print this off. It's going to print off the return. We're going to see that it sends back 4. And notice that it's going through. We're calling the function. It's performing this task, x equals 2 times 2, and it's returning what x is, and x is equal to 4. Fantastic. This is very basic. What, however, if I wanted to actually perform this same task multiple times, but for different numbers? In order to do that, I need to create an argument or a parameter value, excuse me, in my function. And the way I do that is I set it up right here. Within these parentheses, when I'm defining my function, I have a. And now what I'll do is I'll do a times a. And what this is going to do is it's now going to allow me to run any number I want through this. But let's notice what happens when I try to run it without an argument first. When I try to run it, I get an error. And the reason why I got an error is because it's missing one required positional argument. If you notice before with replace, I got the same problem. So in order to actually correct this, we don't need to change anything in our function. We need to add an argument down here. So let's say I want to see get the cubed of 2. We see the result is 4. What about 4? We see the result is 16. Oh, this is squared. Oh well. There we go. We'll do cube this way. There we go. Everyone's happy now. The math people won't come after me and find me. So now we have an actual cubed function that's doing what it's supposed to do and providing the cubed and not the squared by simply multiplying the variable 3 times together. But here you have it. And at its core level, this is the way that a function works. But it can do far more than simply provide an answer with cubed. It can return anything we want it to return. And this is very useful for performing multiple tasks again and again throughout your code. If I didn't do this, if I wanted to print this off each time with different variables, I would have to type in print, and I would have to type in the math each time. But here I can just use the same code over and over again. And like I said, once I've debugged a function, chances are it's not going to return an error ever again, and I don't have to debug something multiple times. And if I ever want to alter this code, I don't have to alter it multiple times throughout my entire Python code. I can simply alter it one time and it'll make all the changes for me. So my point in this is get used to functions, get comfortable with functions early on, and you're going to be all the happier for it. So let's say I did want to actually have return multiple values. For whatever reason, I want to return, and we're going to have x is equal to that. We're going to do a. We're going to return both the x and the y here, which is going to give us both the cubed and the squared. So now everyone's happy. And if you remember correctly from our earlier video on tuples, I told you that in a function you can only return a single object. The tuple allows for you to return multiple objects. And if you see here, it's returned 64 and 16. Two different items in that object, and that allows us to actually get multiple values from a function. So that's how you would return multiple values. And you're not always going to need to return something. In some cases, when you write a function, it's just going to perform a very specific task. And this is I've found in my DH projects when I make a user interface, a GUI, and I have a button hooked up to a function, I don't always want it to return something. Instead, I just have it where it's performing tasks within the function, and that's just fine for me, like creating a network map or iterating through an Excel database and extrapolating all the data. I don't need all that data returned to me. I just needed to gather that data. So this is how you make a function at its base level. You can, however, have a function that has multiple arguments. So let's say we're going to change this up a little bit, and I know this is going to be incorrect now, but let's say we want to do a times b for that y value. Now if I run this, I'm going to get an error, if you watch, and you'll see why. The reason I'm getting an error is because it's only got one argument. I need to have this second argument. That one's missing. So what I need to do is when I'm passing that, I need to have a second argument. And now when I run it, I get that just fine. Now, this is just a very basic example of functions, not something that you're really going to encounter too much in DH stuff. So let's go ahead and do something that you will encounter. Let's make a list. We're going to do Tom. We're going to stick with Tom, Jerry, Jim, and Bob. So what I want to do is I want to iterate across this entire list. I want to pass multiple functions to this list. There's a couple different ways I can do that. Let's go ahead and first decide what we want our function to do. We're going to just make this names. So what I want to do is I want to print off A. That's it. I don't need anything returned. I just want to print off A. So in order to do this, I can say for name in names, this is going to give me a problem. So I want to say, oh, that's why. Okay, I'll be fine. So names in list 1, I want to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to iterate across this list, run it through this function. Keep in mind I'm creating a for loop, so for each name in this list, I am passing it to this names function, and it's performing some specific task. This is just a simple print function. So, but what you see here is that it's actually running, iterating across this entire list and passing it to a separate function. This is going to be one of the more common ways in which you use functions in Python. You're oftentimes going to have to pass multiple values from some data set, and this data set might be a list, it might be a tuple, it might be, I can't think of anything, it might be a dictionary. You're going to have to iterate a task multiple times. This is the way in which you would do it. Well, it's one of the ways in which you would do it.